Here we are. Ladies and gentlemen, namaste, namaste, namaste. Welcome to Deep Dialogues. And as you see, I'm sitting here with an amazing lady in the form of Barbara Hand Clow. And very pleased, this is our second Deep Dialogue together. So we will make sure that the first, which took place at the beginning of last year, is pinned with this one so that you can see the gestation of energy. Was it last year that we spoke at the beginning of last
March
year?
2023.
Oh my gosh,
Isn't that amazing?
time
That's why I'm
flies.
so
Forgive
amazed
me.
that
Forgive me.
I'm so happy to see you
Yeah.
again.
Bless you. Thank you for being here. And as you see, I mean, I just want to quote from one of Barbara's books called The Alchemy of Nine Dimensions. I just want to quote this extraordinary statement about her. Barbara has a message that matters tremendously to every single person on the earth. It is about nothing less than achieving relationship with a brilliant and spiritually potent present within. Barbara is a sage, as you will soon hear, and has had much experience of the awakened community on planet Earth and on other planets, particularly the Pleiades, because she has written a series of books that are really one of the most progressive, one of the most illuminated, and one of the most spectacular series of books known as handbooks about the Pleiades. So welcome, my darling. It's wonderful that you're here.
Thank you for
And
having me. What a joy.
bless you.
Bless you.
We meet in a very interesting time phase because, as we both know, that we're beginning to progress and elevate and therefore transform linear time into the spiraling device of the cyclic nature of time when it's necessary to relate to time. Because, as we know, many of our unseen spirit guardians or many of our star brothers and sisters are living in a different sequence of the cycles of cosmic time rather than being fixated by the linear time and the way that it actually changes us. However, at the same time, we have a common interest, which is the extraordinary explosion of spiritual intelligence that took place through the great harmonic convergence of August 1987. And we were going to use that as a sort of pinion, as a sort of point of reference for the great journey that we've taken over these nearly 40 years, and particularly with because there's so much to talk about in those 40 years, but particularly with reference to 3i Atlas, which I know you have become a master mistress of over the last year, well, certainly since July and its appearance, and how this is awakening for us or providing us with a presage of something very extraordinary that is taking place in this year, spinning through to 2027. So, what were you actually doing in August of 1987? Where were you?
I was at Teotihuacan in Mexico, north of Mexico City, and I was leading ceremonies with another Cherokee teacher who is not with us anymore. And we were leading the early ceremonies, and there were about, I would say, 10, 15,000 people, something like that, the before harmonic convergence. And then that night, one of the most astonishing things happened that has ever happened to me. I was out in the darkness with my son and started to realize that thousands and tens of thousands of people were streaming into Teotihuacan from all of the major roads that go there from northern Mexico and southern Mexico. And I think on the day of harmonic convergence, there's easily 100,000 people at Teotihuacan, if not more. And I was just in a state of joy and ecstasy. And also, I was working for Bear and Company at the time, and
Yeah.
I was the publisher of Jose Arguelles, who brought through the teaching of harmonic convergence. And so I had spent the whole year working with Jose and various people to make it happen. And so to see it actually happen, it was really like when I was a Haight Ashbury hippie back in the 1960s, and all of a sudden everybody just got right into make love, not war. It was wonderful. So that's where I was.
And for those who are unfamiliar, there may be a few, could you perhaps give us an astrological reference for why it was such an acute time from an astrological point of view?
Yeah, I'd have to have a chart for that in front of me, and I don't. So anything I say is not going to click at all.
Okay, but we
Yeah.
know that actually a grand trine opened within the heavens, and
Mhm.
as a result of that, a portal was opened
Mhm.
that brought through, according to Hunbats, who
Mhm.
again is no longer with us. I mean, Hunbats was somebody that I met in the early 70s
Yeah, she's wonderful.
in Mexico.
Mm.
Now, of course, bless him, he's in spirit. We
Yeah.
send love to him. And he informed me, I think a year before the harmonic for convergence took place. So I knew that I needed to be positioned because I knew that I would be in the United Kingdom because of my responsibilities. Although I am, I do dwell in the United Kingdom in the city of London. But I knew that I needed to be at Glastonbury tour for August 15, 16, 17, which I was. And he professed that 144,000 rainbow light warriors were going to be awoken by this extraordinary event, by the emanations of light that we know were also overseen by so many of our star brothers and sisters.
Mhm.
And so, on a very personal level, what happened for you during that time? How did it affect you?
Well, I'd have to say that that's probably the first point in time when I started to really become galactocentric, which means orientation to the galaxy itself. And so we've gone from being geocentric for hundreds of thousands of years, and then heliocentric recently, 400 years ago. And what's happening to us now is we're becoming galactocentric. And so, regarding what's going on now, our orientation to the center of the galaxy is becoming highly activated and highly connected by our visitor, Three Eye Atlas. So, Three Eye Atlas is coming through as a teacher with all kinds of ways of imprinting consciousness on the different planets. Because each one of the planets, of course, has a mind of its own and an archetype of its own. And so, as we know, Three Eye Atlas first passed by Mars. And when Three Eye Atlas passed by Mars, peace started to descend on the planet. And even though some of the arguments over peace are on the edge of falling apart, it would seem, they still seem to be holding. There seems to be a universal desire to stop warfare. And
Yeah,
then, of course, it went by Venus and brought in the feminine and the sense of the feminine womb and came close to our planet. So it's
yeah,
really been activating. We have to think of Three Eye Atlas as a teacher for the whole solar system.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And what do you feel the major message of Three Eye Atlas is for we Earthlings?
Right. I think the major message that's coming in, and I think it's very potent for people, is the facts are our universe is a universe that consists of a lot of plasma. And Three Eye Atlas has been activating the plasma in our solar system. And with that plasmic activation, then what happens is all the different realms that plasma is in contact with, the fields of the other planets, the fields of consciousness in our solar system, those are turning into a gigantic, coherent wave. And this is what's really affecting people because there's no question that that wave is now in place and it's changing Earth, it's changing Mars, it's changing Venus. And for example, on the Earth, we're having a lot of Earth changes, you know. And so the reason that I have total confidence that this is a positive experience is because the last planet that 3I Atlas is passing close to in May 19th, not, excuse me, March 19th of this year is Jupiter. And Jupiter is the home of the masters and the home of the great sages and teachers in the universe itself. And so the fact that 3I Atlas will finally deposit new codes into the field of Jupiter. And so you have to ask, how could it do that? Well, that's where I got into realizing that 3I Atlas is functioning as a tesseract, which is a geometrical form of intelligence that has the ability to alter fields in the solar system, in the galaxy, and in the universe. So I think we're going to see a great awakening of the understanding of the tesseract. And
Mm.
then, as you know, because I sent it to you, there's the issue of the five platonic solids. And most mathematicians and astrophysicists work with tesseracts just as a tetrahedral form.
Yeah.
But in fact, they take the form of all five of the platonic solids. And I think that knowledge is going to come in. I think it's going to flood in if I have anything to do with it.
And so when you speak of the knowledge, if you were to, and because we're talking about a form and an essence that is multifarious, but when you move to the very center of it, in terms of the way that the substance of Three Eye Atlas affects you, what do you
Mhm.
see that teaching is?
I think it's the biggest teaching that has come to the human race in a long, long time, which is remembering that we are not alone. And I fully expect by the time Three Eye Atlas passes close to Jupiter and then finally goes out of our solar system, I fully expect that everybody on this planet is going to realize that we are not alone. And for many people, that is going to create a great deal of fear, especially in the scientific community, because the scientific community bases so many of its theories on the dominance of man and the intelligence of man and the advanced evolutionary nature of humans on this earth. And we are simply just one among many, many, many beings and spirit guides in the universe and in our especially in our. I think right now we're probably not going to get very far beyond our galaxy for a while. But that's not going to be too bad to make it into galactic consciousness.
Yeah. So, in terms of my experience of these extraordinary angels that came to me, the 12
Mhm,
angels that fondly call themselves the angels of Atlantis, their
mhm,
their Kabbalistic name is the Malachim.
mhm,
So they are seated in the sands of time, in human
mhm,
time, very, very ancient beings. And they call themselves the angels of Atlantis because they were around during the
mhm,
last period of time, during the end times of Atlantis. So
mhm,
they remind us of who we truly are. They mirror the purest, the highest, the deepest, the most essential qualities of who we truly are, that the monad is a reflection of our own divine spark. Rather
mhm,
than constantly looking without. So they're
mhm,
reminding us about the intrinsic nature of who we are and how
mhm,
love is at the very core of the substance, and that there is no separation and there is no duality within
mhm,
the entire consciousness intelligence
mhm,
of the monad. So they actually have reminded me also that Three Eye Atlas is interesting, coincidentally, that we have three eye, third eye Atlas.
mhm. Sure.
And that
Oh, yeah.
Atlas, Atlas, the son of the great Poseidon, was
Yes.
one of the great intelligences that innovated the substance of what Atlantis was all about, how the essence, how the spirit, how the intrinsic nature of Atlantis was given form, and
Mhm.
how it was necessary to complete that form to move on in its gestation into the forms that have come hitherto, whether it be in, former civilizations like ancient Greece or Rome, or indeed this civilization. Of course, we're reminded that all civilizations rise and they all fall. Not that that's a tragedy, it's just that we move into a morphing procedure. We move into transformative procedure, just as we are now. So isn't it interesting, just to echo what you were saying, isn't it interesting that this time of immense information for those of us who are aware are also aware of the chaos that is going on within the world, and
Mhm.
how we're being reminded by that chaos that it may be an extension of our own intelligences, because what we see without is also a mirror image of what's going on within, that we're making a choice to move in a healthier direction, to move in a more loving direction, to move in a more multidimensional direction, and therefore we move into great respect and great devotion for the galactic heart.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
find this very interesting. And if, if we take the token, and it's only a token of third eye Atlas,
Mhm.
that the third eye was evidently being awoken because so much intelligence has been stimulated by three eye. And
Yeah.
it moves on so many multi-layers, which you've talked about ad infinitum with podcasters preceding this particular meeting, which many people will just, all they need to do is to be intelligent and tune into all of the podcasts that you've been on recently. Um, what do you feel the major activation has been for we humans at this time from 3i?
Well, first of all, as I've already mentioned, it's realizing that we're not alone and realizing how much support and communication is available to us here. But what I'd like to do, Stuart, is stretch out the time. Like
Mm.
when we think of Atlantis, most people think of, 15, 20,000 years back. But I believe the Atlantean cycle and also the Lemurian cycle is in the middle of this. But I believe the Atlantean cycle on this planet is goes back 100,000 years. And
Yeah.
as far, oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
as far
And
as
more, I would say.
hmm?
And more.
Probably more, but
And
what I
more.
can say
The
about
angels point me towards 250, 300,000 years
that
ago.
could easily be the case, yeah.
Yeah.
But where the Pleiadians came in was 104,000 years ago. And so during this basically 100,000 year cycle, we have gone through four periods of the precession of the equinoxes. And so, from the Pleiadian point of view, and also Cherokee from my background, we have now completed these four cycles, and we are now in the fifth world. And the dominant emotional and intellectual and spiritual field that all of us are operating in at this time is the fifth dimension because of this movement into the fifth world. And so it's really going to be interesting to observe how people, function, because for some people this is very comfortable. Like it's very comfortable for you and me, and it was very uncomfortable when those levels were not dominant. But for a whole lot of people on this planet who have not done their emotional work, their karmic work, their spiritual work, this is going to be a very, very difficult time. And this is why I think those of us who are here as teachers are very important right now. Like, I'm actually a very reclusive, shy person, but I have no choice except to come out into the public now in order to help with this process because it's very hard, very difficult.
Yeah, and of course your influence has been prominent for many, many years. So
Mm.
it's not that you're just coming out, I've been very much aware of you for the last 40 years. So,
Mm.
and waiting for the opportunity of being able to move into a deeper conversation with you.
Nice.
So, that's why I became so fascinated in your books, of course. And I know that you've also applied interest to some of the books that I've read as well.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
well, we were exchanging before we actually came into recording that we're both profound dyslexics. So
Hmm.
on many levels, there's just a small human detail which is rather amazed about the fact that we become writers,
Yeah.
because for my I know that for you experience speech much more easily than you were in relation
Hmm.
to the written word. And of course, there are many merits in this, aren't there? We don't see it as a big, great handicap, although of
Hmm.
course it can be appreciated as such. But we transformed, we morphed whatever the ignominies were that we experienced. I mean, I was constantly told as a child that I was nothing and would always be nothing. But there was
Hmm.
something inside me that always believed that there was something.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, I had an immensely loving mother who was
Hmm.
constantly grounding me in unconditional love and said, "You will always find the way, my darling, you will always find the way." So that, that reassurance was very, very securing and safing. But, I share this insight with you. At the age of 8, it all became a little bit too bewildering. So 8.5, 9 years of age, I decided to shut up. So I stopped speaking for 2 years. I self-muted for 2 years. And it was just a sudden decision, it came. I knew I
Hmm.
was being illuminated by this being here that I know was Archangel Michael, and this being here that was my guardian, seeing them as orbs of light and beams of light. And the shutting up, I thought I've always been very garrulous, I've always been very talkative. And I thought what it would do is actually take the attention away from me. But what really happened is that I got very still inside
Hmm.
and very grounded.
Hmm.
And I would suggest that that's actually probably in the chronology of my life, that was the first time that my soul really came in. And as a result, my third eye expanded, and I was able to, through my sensorium, through my sensuality and my sensory nature, I was able to read people much more easily. So I could see who was truthful and who was untruthful.
Very
See
interesting. Yeah.
through the auric field, because I have always seen sound. I've always
Hmm.
seen sound as light, as color.
Hmm.
So our dyslexia, we know, moved us in a certain direction of being
Hmm.
able to perceive the preternatural nature of the universe.
Hmm.
And as a result, now we're using it as an interesting mechanism to write books and to share information. And
Hmm.
wow, you have a lot of information to share.
Hmm. Well, and of course, in my case, my dyslexia, it's interesting that there's a difference here, but it's really all the same thing. It's what made me a writer.
Yeah.
So I was so frustrated so much of the time by what I knew and what I felt, and it felt very much at the sound level, I think, but I couldn't express it. And so I ended up going into publishing. I ended up going into writing 15, 16 books. And it was only when I wrote fiction in 2015 through 2021 that I really conquered my dyslexia as a writer. And I also would like to add, Stuart, that my husband Jerry and we taught together now, have been married for 52 years, which is amazing. And Jerry was one of those people who was a natural writer. And when he was at prep school, when he was 14, 15 years old, he could hear words but he also could translate them into writing. And so he was selected for all kinds of honors for being a really, really terrific writer. But because I married him, I had a helper. And so I just would like to put it in here that with every one of my books, Jerry has really helped me because he's used to my dyslexia and he knows how to take a sentence and hog slog it around so that it's perfect. And then finally, with fiction, I attained the ability to write, you know, interesting
How
stories.
lucky for you that you've had Jerry in your life to support you. But it was all intended to be that way, wasn't it?
Hmm. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
when we coming back to Three Eye Atlas and the changes that we've already seen and how, as you've commented, it's leading us towards being much more galactic centric.
Hmm.
So we become aware. I mean, after all, is the universe friendly is not necessarily a new concept. It was certainly something that was talked about at the end of the 19th century, with the arousal of spiritual intelligence there through Madame Blavatsky, through Gurdjieff, through blah, 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 blah. So many wonderful personalities. When I say blah, 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 I don't mean to dismiss them. There are just so many. And of course, then the wonderful interface between the imagination and quantum physics with Albert Einstein. And
Hmm.
he coined the phrase, the universe, is it a friendly place? We need to find out. And so
Hmm.
we've reached this point where we're looking into the enormity of Three Eye Atlas and realizing, well, the intelligence that is composite within this extraordinary vessel could easily have annihilated us, could easily have created
Oh, yeah.
some intergalactic force that would
Hmm.
have, brought a satellite,
Hmm.
not a satellite, a large form of mass towards our
Hmm.
planet, which would have moved the planet from its polar axis into destructive behaviors. This hasn't happened. But what's interesting is that the shift that's taking place has been colossal within our intelligence rather than on the outside of our wonderful Gaia.
Hmm.
And so, what do you feel has been, in your experience of people receiving your information, what do you feel the greatest shift has been within people's physiology and psyche?
Well, people are feeling a lot more sensitive. During December, particularly, people were really working on overcoming their fear. And so many people that I encountered were working on it so hard that they were just absolutely half crazy. But I think I've received a lot of information from Three Eye Atlas directly. And that period is really important to discuss at this point, December 2025. Because if you look at this thing carefully, you can see that the sun has been becoming extremely potent, extremely activated, and it has been affecting the Earth to an extreme degree, especially the relationship between coronal holes in the sun and coronal mass ejections are very deeply related to earthquakes on our planet. And the information that I've received is that when Three Eye Atlas flew by the sun, it actually was almost like a sacrificial act in a way, because the sun basically exploded the closer that Three Eye Atlas came to the sun and then passed by. And the information that I've received is the Three Eye Atlas recalibrated the sun because I think we were on the verge of a absolutely catastrophic solar flare. In fact, a lot of scientists were predicting a solar flare larger than the Carrington event in 1859. And so Three Eye Atlas has done us a real favor at this point. And so as people deal with their feelings about it, and when they hear uh, uh, dogmatic scientists predicting disasters or saying negative things about it, whatever, I think it's about time we realized that Three Eye Atlas did us a great big favor. And I think the period from December 31st, was it 19? No, December 19th, when it was closest to the Earth, to the flyby with being close to Jupiter, which is March 19th. It's a 3 month period. I think that this is a period of time where all of us must do two things. I think it's important for us to follow what's happening with the earth changes. For example, Highway 1 and gigantic sections of Highway 1, which is where Big Sur is located, just fell into the ocean in on January 2nd. And only the people who are watching the YouTubes, and particularly watching Stefan Burns, only people who are watching alternative media know anything about. We are having the largest number and the most active, potent level of earthquakes on volcanoes on this planet that has probably ever occurred, except maybe during the fall of Atlantis. And there, I don't know what's going on in England for you, or you're in California right now,
No, I'm in
aren't you?
London. I'm in London,
Okay,
England.
because in the American media, we're not getting any information about anything going on. Etna is ready to slide part of itself into the sea, Campi Flegrei in Italy, and I feel that it's important for people to tune into these different earth changes, tune into your body, tune into the deepest part of yourself, the deepest vibrational part of yourself, and really work on fear. Because this is a really great opportunity to work on fear. And then I also feel that the degree we live on this planet as a privilege. We are here to interact and express the powers of Gaia and the powers of our planet. And we are what we do with our vibration in the middle of Earth changes and in the middle of this experience on Earth is actually terribly important. I think that's one of the things that Three Eye Atlas is really coming through to remind us of.
Yeah. Well, if we see the dynamic of this extraordinary vessel
Mm,
and how it's in many ways impenetrable in its
mm,
travel through the
yeah.
extraordinary waves of solar force,
Hmm.
through the way that we've perceived the galaxy working in relation to the solar deity, its closeness, its perihelion, way back
Hmm.
in December, all of the associated activities that have taken place. Surely we're also seeing that the forces that be within the galaxy, the forces that impinge on planet Earth, are being stretched exponentially as our interior musculature and lymphatic system and neurology is also being stretched in the
Hmm.
most extraordinary way to allow us to see a way of being able to gestate onto a much higher frequency of vibration so that our resonance really changes. That's the way that I'm actually seeing it. But you pointed something very illuminating, which is about the substance of fear, which is something that I work with constantly in people's
Hmm.
lives, particularly using sound to reharmonize, because I'm a
Hmm.
sound healer, to reharmonize the substance of fear within their bodies through alchemy, through transmutation. I wonder, as you pinpointed, if you could share with us from your canon of vast experience, what would you recommend as a tool for people to transmute fear?
You just described it, sound healing. And also, I think paying attention to our diet even more seriously than usual, because the earth changes are second dimensional teachings.
Mm.
And our intestines are very much a second dimensional organ of our body. And so a lot of people are reporting a lot of intestinal stress. And this is an opportunity to figure out how to work with your body at the second dimensional level in a more profound way. Like I don't think I really understood the second dimension, even though have been one of the best writers about it since 2004. That's when Alchemy first came out. But this last year, 2025, I got a graduate degree in understanding tectonic pressures on this planet. And so I think we should welcome this opportunity to really understand how our planet functions,
Yeah.
because if we understand that at the second dimensional level, then we're much more likely to be able to go into a harmonic coherence in the third dimension. And
Yeah.
so it's interesting, Stuart, right now because the way my dimensional system works, as you know, is the second dimension is the area below our bodies to the central core crystal of our planet. Then the fourth dimension is the archetypal realm, where we're dealing with duality and polarity and a lot of emotional complexes. And understanding that just if people just understand how the second dimension is the realm under the surface of the earth, and then think about the how the fourth dimensional archetypal dimension connects us all and also causes conflict for us that causes us to deal with karma. And if we can just keep focusing on what's in the fourth dimension and what's in the second dimension, because we're given such a grand opportunity right now to look at it because we're being pressured. Like, think what it's like to be an American, and then the president of the United States can just bop into Venezuela and take out the leader of the country plus his wife and dump him in a jail in New York City. That's fourth dimensional. And so as you experience what you think about these issues, more clarity starts to come into the third dimension because the third dimension is where we live and this is where we exist. And this is where we can access sound healing or good nutrition or emotional coherence. It's only in this dimension. That's where we are right now.
Well, as we are enticed and fascinated by what's happening outside of us,
Mhm.
it's really quintessential that we become aware of also that that's a mirror image of what's going on within us, and that we can
Mhm.
alter the outside by altering the inside. This is what
Yes,
you're
sir.
really referring to. And the end, obviously we're on the cusp of an extraordinary mode of expansion, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. If we're
Mhm.
looking into the heavens and we're seeing the plentitude of the galaxy, we're becoming more intelligent about each individual planet, the characteristics thereof, the nature of the archetype, and also the way that the planets are interrelating, then we're also becoming aware of the way that the liver and the gallbladder are relating to one
Mhm.
another. Because as we know, certainly in medievalism and in a
Mhm.
lot of the great Hermetic principles that arise out of Egypt and the Middle East, that the planets represent different organs in our bodies. That really what we're being given, it seems to me, is an opportunity to prime our neurology
Mhm.
and
Prime our, what was that word? Prime
to
our,
prime, meaning to
oh,
tweak
but our,
our neurology.
yeah, but your urology.
Neurology, our nervous
Neurology.
system,
Okay, good. I got it.
our
Okay.
nervous system. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Because the majority of people who come to me are not in flow.
Hmm.
The majority of people who come to me are not in flow, so they're living constantly in separation.
Hmm. Hmm.
The majority of people who come who are not in flow and live in separation are actually living such anxieties between, even though they may have safe homes and safe families, they're feeling frightened about what's taking place in the world.
Hmm.
So what I'm saying is, I mean, if I have another person that comes to me and says, "Do you think it's important to meditate?" I think I may burst a gasket. No, I won't. I'm just, it's just another indication to me on the fact that I need to work on my patience.
Hmm.
Um, but, I'm constant reminding people that we're preparing our neurology. And if we
Hmm.
prepare our neurology through meditation, through sound healing, through looking after our biochemistry, by the food and fluid substances that we're putting into our bodies, by being aware of the fact that Mother Earth, as you were saying earlier, has a series of nodes that are actually those points that create the rich tapestry of the crystalline grid of our planet. So we
Hmm.
have nodes within our bodies. If we're seeing all of these corollaries or these parallels, it means that we can actually prepare our bodies for the true opening within our beings of becoming aware of the divine spark within. So we're preparing our neurology for a new sociology.
hmm
And as a result of that, we're preparing the whole of our beings for a completely new way of interpreting what our world is all about
hmm So
through the
speak.
mechanisms of love and belief, faith, and trust.
Mhm.
We'll always be looked after.
So speaking of priming our neurology, and I really like that, let me put it in the context of Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, my book. All right, so here you are, you're on the west coast of California, and suddenly the San Andreas Fault snaps. All right. Second dimensional activation for anybody who's there immediately. And I've been in a couple of large earthquakes, and I've had fantastic experiences with them. Because what happens is your neurology in the third dimension, where you live in linear space and time, your neurology knows all about how to go out of your body. Because I've gone through many past life regressions where I've died, and it's just no big deal. It's when you let go, you just simply go. It's just simply not a big deal at all. And so for people who have primed their neurology, they can be confident that if they should end up in something extremely disastrous and unpleasant, they're just simply going to go right out of their human body and right into the higher dimensions, you know? And so, I like that concept a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And wherever we are in relation to the stress stimuli, there is
hmm
always this possibility. Actually, more than this, there's always this probability of being
hmm
able to move more and more into the light body, but
Yeah.
through the physiology rather than through the intellect.
hmm
Because
hmm
all that we're saying, we may be identifying some very extraordinary concepts. But, one of the intriguing things I know that we both share is that these concepts are useless if we're not relating them to the experience of
Yeah.
what it is to be in presence, the
Yeah.
experience of what it is to be in awareness, the experience of what it is to be in relationship, where we're not projecting our fears or our neuroses and all of the accoutrement that is created through the ego wanting separation. So we see the purpose of duality and we move back into oneness.
hmm
And then, of course, we coalesce, as you were saying. We become even more part of the light, and the
hmm
light carries us.
hmm
This is quintessential. And I don't believe that, having been through great suffering in my own life, having been in situations where my life was threatened, and what the magic that took place that,
hmm
as it were, extricated me from those situations. They've all proven to me what my inner power is all about.
hmm
That, what we're speaking about is an absolute reality. I think this is very important. As far as sound is concerned, we were sharing this earlier, that sound is really on the map at the moment, which is great for people like myself, because I've been pioneering it for over 50 years. Yeah, I'm older than I look. And it's been challenging because our world is so out of harmony. One of my pet illustrations is the fact that, I mean, so many of us living here, you know what I'm saying? I mean, we're right here like this, and when everything's going, I mean, it's going so fast. And this is happening all around the world, but particularly on the great landmass of the United States, which I, by the way, have a love affair of. And the only reason why I'm in London at the moment is because something came along called COVID.
hmm
It came and it went. So what I'm tuning people into is, yes, reach for the tuning forks. Yes, reach for the crystal bowls. Yes, reach for extraordinary ecstatic or ambient music. Yes, reach for the great gongs. But if those instruments are not inside, then we're not really harmonizing all of the tributaries of the way that flow takes place. And of course, the most crucial thing is, are we breathing? Are we really breathing and feeling be-boom, 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 be-boom? And most people are completely non-present of these vital
mhm,
functions. So
mhm,
if we can bring ourselves back, then automatically we begin to open our energy field and see possibilities of being able to surf whatever life brings us in
mhm.
a much greater way, in a much more quintessential way, and therefore in a much more harmonious way with the great inspiration that we receive from the universe, from the galaxy. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, let's go back to these nodes in the body.
Yeah.
The reason I'm so excited about the information that Three Eye Atlas has been giving me as it's been moving through is that when we talk about nodes in the body, I think we're actually talking about light within tesseracts that that reflect or that not reflect but vibrate with the five platonic solids.
Mm,
And so I took some tuning fork classes and loved them with John Beaulieu. And what I found when I worked with tuning forks is I literally, as I passed the tuning fork over a person's solar plexus, say, I could hear each organ.
yeah. Yeah.
Literally, you
Yeah.
can too, I'm sure, but for me,
Oh,
it was
sure. Yes.
a horrific shock. And so since
Mm,
I didn't intend to do sound healing because I'm too busy with what I'm doing, I started asking a lot of questions of people who were doing sound healing sessions because this was 20 years ago when I did this. And so 20 years ago, a lot of people were going and getting one tuning fork session and they were out of there, just out of there. So I thought, well, what's going on? And then I realized, like, oh, I know what it is. Their liver got vibrated, say, and then they went into all kinds of really difficult emotional issues in
mm,
that session. And that was enough of that.
mm.
And so now what I'm hearing from you and from quite a few other people at this point is now people are seeking sound healing with bowls and with tuning forks. And that shows to me that people have cleared away quite a bit of that detritus that was stuck in the nodes. The nodes have now become, crystalline and clear so that they can be vibrated and so that a person can really heal.
Yeah,
Let
I believe
right.
it's, I do believe it's happening. Yeah, I
Hmm.
do believe it's happening. Um, and you know, if 20 years ago the response or the reaction was a violent, no, I don't need this, we
Hmm.
know that what that really is providing a
Hmm.
commentary on is that that individual simply wasn't ready to go
Yeah.
into the internal journey. And that
Hmm.
because of all the vastness that has taken place over the last 20 years,
Hmm.
um, people are now much more open.
Hmm. Yeah.
What I'm also very aware of, and fortunately, I'm in the hub or the node in my community, which is growing and growing and growing, the Angels of Atlantis community, that thousands and thousands of people come to the work. And what I'm also very aware of is that people are scattered
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
process of their living, thinking, breathing, feeling process.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that it's very difficult because they're so used to giving their power away to the system, to the
Hmm.
ideologues, to the patriarchy, to doing. And most of the time, we're not doing what we could be doing because they say so, whoever they happen to be, with the phantasms of our own consciousness or the literal, the history of our teachers or our parents or our peers or our line managers or whomever, that we cease finding the resolution for ourselves.
Hmm.
That's so I'm constantly reminding people that feeling is the language of the soul and that we need to just organize our intellects.
Yeah.
Pretty apparent also that on a two-dimensional level, that through all of the crises that we've seen happen over the last year in some of the great educational foundations all over the
Yeah.
world, but particularly in the Ivy League institutions of education, that there's a great deal of confusion, and that confusion has actually been born of a form, a modus, an ideology that has actually grown over the last 25 years, that is now
Mhm.
perpetuating itself in relation to woke, so much so that our young people have identity crisis and
I
then
know.
move into this paroxysm of intellectualizing,
Yeah.
opinionating about what a
Mhm.
man is and what a woman is, and become totally confused about sexuality. That seems to have served us in whatever way it has, because it's been pinpointed as being another device into the neuroses of separation rather than bringing us into unification. And my heart goes out to many of the people who are caught within the
Mhm.
controversy or the confusion or the despair of am I a transsexual, am I not a transsexual? So that we come back into balance, you know?
Yes,
Um,
yes. Well, let's go back to astrology. When you and I talked in 2023, we talked a bit about Saturn being in Aquarius and then going into Pisces.
yeah,
And so what's happening February 20th of this year is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. I'm sure quite a few people have been discussing this one with you. And with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, a lot of the things that we've been seeing with people going too fast, being confused, too much this, too much movement, is going to change very, very radically. And people are going to are going to find themselves being thrown into what you were thrown into when you were 7 or 8 years old, where you just went into silence. And the way this is going to work, as far as I can tell, and Stuart, this particular conjunction is a conjunction that occurs about every 5 or 6 thousand years, because it isn't Saturn conjunct Neptune that's important. It's Saturn conjunct Neptune in 0 to 2 degrees Aries. And Aries is the beginning of a whole new when Saturn and Neptune conjunct in Aries, it's the beginning of a whole new spiritual cycle. The last time this occurred was the time of the Buddha and the time of Christ and Zoroaster and the teacher of the Jains.
mm,
And what happened was the world, 5,500, 6,000 years ago, went through a complete spiritual shift. And believe it or not, that is what's coming next month. And so, like you being thrown into silence, people are going to find themselves just naturally slowing down, listening within. The more this outer cacophony continues, the more people are pulled out of themselves. And that
yeah,
Saturn-Neptune conjunction is simply going to make it possible for people to go deeply within again. And I
yeah.
think it's going to be a beautiful experience.
Hurrah, 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 I
It's
say.
time.
Yeah,
It's time.
absolutely. And
Absolutely time.
from an astrological perspective, that resonates so powerfully within me. You know, I see the light, I see
Yeah.
the illumination. Was I've received the illumination from a different degree because the angels have a prophecy
Hmm.
that something very extraordinary is taking place at this time, where
Yeah.
planet Earth, Gaia, is receiving a huge wave of plasmic, plasmic energy from the Pleiades, which is seen as a blue wave.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then in March, April, a blue lady will appear
It's very
from the
powerful.
Pleiades, one of the seven sisters.
Hmm.
I see this blue lady as Hathor,
Hmm.
and that there will be a huge awakening as she appears, that
Hmm.
the level of emanation from her force will be one of such quintessential love that we will literally be like Saul on the road to Damascus. You know, there will be this moment where we are absolutely spellbound by the
Hmm.
beauty, by the wonder, by the
Hmm.
awe, by the magnificence, and by
Hmm.
the love of her
Mhm.
emanation. And this will change us utterly.
Mhm.
So I feel you see that the quintessence of 3i has been awakening something really powerful
Oh yeah.
in our third eyes.
Mhm.
And as a result of that, the calcification around the pineal is also being released by light emission and all of the varying technology that, if we're awake, we've used to be able to really wake ourselves up. So that what's going to happen in March and April of next year, which incidentally is also suggested, the angel suggests that she will hover over the Giza Plateau.
Mhm. Now you said next year, so do you mean
This
220?
year, this year,
Yeah,
March,
okay,
April,
just making sure.
this
Yeah,
year.
yeah, yeah.
And that's why I'm going to be running the retreat
Good.
in Egypt during
Mhm.
April, you see. Clever. And that when she hovers over the Giza Plateau, it will be configured by a red star,
Mhm.
which I believe is Regulus.
Mhm.
And a doorway will open in the Great
Yeah.
Sphinx and lead us into the halls of Amenti and all sorts of other great chambers of
Mhm.
intelligence so that we can begin to really discover many of the records, not just simply the psychic records, but literally the material records
Yeah.
of Atlantis.
And the rooms underground and all the technology that has now
Yeah.
been accessed by SARS tomography. But I
Yeah.
also want to throw a little more astrology in here, just to say that I'm looking at the chart for the January new moon right now, where the planets are, at this point during January, February, March, are bunching together, and they're all pulling together and grouping in ways that are going to make it impossible for people to stop any of this. And I think with this new moon coming January 18th, I think we're going to get the first little glimpse of the power of this force. And I can tell you as an astrologer, and it would take me hours to explain exactly how it works, which I will be doing seasonally on my website. Because as you know, every season I give another little talk about what's going on. There's going to be no getting around this one. It's going to happen.
Well, I believe it in the absolute quintessence of my center that this is going to happen. And it fills me full of glee because I see, through the journey that I've been on personally over the last 45, 50 years, having been awake as a child, but then having difficulty being able to create a language that was suitable for 3D, particularly in the way that I was reared. Um, Incidentally, when I came out of silence, which was about 2 years, I have a brother who's a year older, so he was my code breaker all the way through, and we have this psychic connection. And
Mhm.
so I would just look at him and he would know exactly what I was thinking. So I'd say, what Stuart's saying is, however, when I came out of it, the way that I breached or created a bridge, moved from the breach into the bridge, was by humming. I
Mhm.
couldn't sound, so I
Mhm.
hum. I mean, I couldn't speak because my
Mhm.
vocal cords were completely ossified. Well, not
Mhm.
completely, but there was, I'd been absolutely silent for 2 years and through a time of the beginnings of early puberty. So there's a great
Mhm.
deal of hormonal shift going on within the thyroid. And my mother nearly crashed the car. So
Mhm.
her ingenuity was, well, because I hadn't sounded for 2 years and suddenly her child is humming. She said, oh,
Mhm.
darling, I think what we need to do is put you into a church choir. And
Mhm.
I thought, yes. I thought,
Great.
wow, this
Yeah.
is a wonderful opportunity because, again, it's about the exchange of sound and sustained tonality, singing the
Mhm.
hymn, singing the psalms, singing the anthem. This was a Protestant church. And that's how I learned to read. I learned to read because I was very good at copying the other boys.
Mhm.
But actually, as I held the missal and began to read the primary function of music, the
Mhm.
words dropped into the flow.
Mhm.
That's how I
Yeah.
started to read, which led me eventually to using sound as an actor because I saw the extraordinary effect of the
Mhm.
way that the voices that were around at that time, and I'm really talking about the late 60s, early 70s, and through the
Mhm.
70s, the great voices of, people like Judi Dench and Ian McKellen. These were the actors that I was working with in the Royal Shakespeare Company. That's what opened me to the possibility of creating these platforms of harmony. So
Mhm.
as I'm just reflecting on the journey of the last 45, 50 years, and so the certainty with which you express that is something that I relish in the most extraordinary way.
Mhm.
And deep in the intuitive aspect of my being, because most of my connection, of course, with the angels is highly intuitive, although I
Mhm.
feel it moving through the whole of my sensorium, that it
Mhm.
has to be this way.
Mhm. Mhm.
This is the
Yeah.
next stage of human involvement. So where will you be in March and April of this year?
Um, I'm planning on being at this point after this talk in deep meditation and silence until Three Eye Atlas has met with Jupiter, and I want to see what happens. I do this. I don't. Everything is so intense for me that I can't use astrology to say do this at this point or do that at that point. I don't do that.
Yeah, yeah,
So I don't know. I probably w will not be able to consider going out of the United States because Jerry and I don't have cell phones. We're both so sensitive that we can't handle cell phones, and so we travel the world and taught everywhere almost on this planet for about 20, 25 years, and we may not ever leave the United States. At this point, we moved back to Santa Fe where we founded Bear and Company originally back in the 80s. And we have all these incredible sacred sites right here from the Pueblo people. So I think we're going to be right here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, we could go on and on for hours, but I'm very aware of your
Yeah.
time. And so I want to thank you
Yes.
for your generosity of time. And we have reached a very amicable point of completion for this hour. So,
Mm.
from the very core of my being, I want to thank you for all of this iridescent information that you've shared with us.
Hmm.
And what I will make sure, because this is a Zoom recording, I will make sure that when my tech team are presenting it for publication, as it were, for broadcast, that your email address is also associated with, and I beg your pardon, I don't mean your email address, your website is
Hmm.
associated with it, with your
Yeah.
permission. That's,
That's handclow2012.com.
yeah,
And the seasonal readings are really turning out to be a profound guide at this point for quite a few people because I know that everything is going to work out okay. And I believe that. I've never been a pessimist or a negative person, and I never will be.
yeah, yeah. Well,
And it's so nice to know more about your story. Especially, I'm going to be thinking about going silent at that point because, boy, I felt like doing it, but I didn't do it. Maybe I need to do it now.
initially it was through duress, but the intelligence that I brought to the observation of what happened is that it has made a tremendous amount of sense in the unfurling nature of my own destiny,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
how then I became, after spending the 70s as an actor, then I was working in the United States, about to make a big movie in Hollywood, and my brother telephoned me and said, you need to know that Mum's dying. She
mhm,
has
mhm,
cancer. Her father had died 2 years prior. They were quite young. They were in their late 50s.
mhm,
And so I, of course, let the movie go and came back to the United Kingdom and nursed her for a whole year. And then a year after she passed, a week after she passed, she came to me and gave me this extraordinary outline of how she was going to be assisting me in my
mhm,
future destiny. And at that point, the telephone rang, and an extraordinarily powerful person that I'd known of within the entertainment industry said, "What are you doing? Why haven't I seen you?" And I said, "Well, what I'm doing is this. I'm really being this." And she said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know. I've lost my agent and manager, but I need some work." So she said, "Well, come and teach for me." So that's when my
mhm.
voice coaching career started.
Oh,
In her
wonderful.
second breath, she said, "And there's this woman I want you to go and work with." I don't want to work with her. This is 1980. She's just taken over the Conservative Party. So 2 weeks later,
Mhm,
I was walking into Downing Street and
Mhm,
working with
mhm.
Margaret Thatcher. And that was the beginning of my career. So you could say that the temple door just was flung
Isn't
open.
that wonderful? And the King, as I told you before, but the King's Speech is just probably one of my favorite movies. I love
Yeah,
that. And I know
yeah,
you coached him, and he
yeah,
was wonderful in that
yeah.
movie. That was awesome.
He's
That was
extreme.
incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here with us and for, imbibing all of these wonderful, wonderful, wonderful ideas and feelings. Hopefully, you've also been transported by the vibrational currency that we've been sharing. I know I have been. And thank you
Mhm.
deeply, Barbara.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
And I know we're all sending you huge amounts of love and well wishes for the period of stillness and silence that you're
Yes.
going to be moving into. And I'm going to make it a date in my diary to email you post-March, early
Mm.
April, to see how it's gone.
Okay. All right. So mail me your address so that I can have
I
Manzini
will.
send you a copy of the
So
new
thank
edition.
you. And everybody, namaste, namaste, namaste.